lot easier to say. We leverage expertise and experience of more than 65 CEOs and top-level executives from Colorado's largest employers representing academia, business, community, and government. We have 4 policy pillar priorities which guide the issues, and these are prioritize a competitive tax and regulatory environment, reimagine Colorado's workforce, invest in a future-forward infrastructure, and lead with purpose. Now, I'm engaged with this because I really embrace the idea that a job isn't just about earning a paycheck. It's about fostering dignity, unlocking opportunities, securing lasting prosperity for individuals and their families. And this is a critical issue because we're going to discuss it today. Sound public policy decisions are being made that promote job creation and the thriving economy. And when businesses succeed, people succeed, and communities succeed. Now, most of us think that the pillars of our life are faith, family, and work. And work takes up so much of our time. So since the government's now involved in more activities around work, funding work, deciding what is good work or not, this is more than a theoretical exercise and discussion we're going to have tonight. This has meaning to us as employers and to our staff. So we welcome you in joining us and leveraging our voice to ensure our vision of a prosperous Colorado for all becomes and remains a reality. If you'd like to learn more about COBRT and why you should consider becoming a member, I invite you to talk with one of our board members today who they're scattered around here. Together, we're shaping a future by ensuring that employers have not just a voice, but a seat at the table where decisions are made and policies are shaped. So today's conversation is just one of the examples of that. And with that, I'd like to invite our fearless CEO leader, Debbie Brown, to join us up here.
Thank you, George. George had to give me that compliment because the last guy who introduced me without such nice things to say. Thanks everybody for being here. This is a topic that we've been talking about for the last year or so, working with our partners, Lee and his team with Colorado Workforce Development Council, and trying to lean in on this conversation and make sure that we understand what's coming to affect employers, not only at the federal level, but the state level as well. So welcome. It's important to get information out to some of our employers to make sure that you understand what's coming, and then also have a chance to give some feedback. So while we're having this convening today, we're excited to get your feedback later, perhaps find some opportunities for you to weigh in on some of the details to make sure you fully understand some of these issues and how it might affect your employees. So with this, we're going to have a really great panel. I'm excited to introduce each of them, and then they're going to have about 5 minutes to sort of lay the groundwork on what they're working on and how they view this particular issue from their point of view, from their seat. And then we'll have a little bit of moderated Q&A to delve a little bit more deeply into the topic. And then after that, because we like to do this with Colorado Business Roundtable, we have drinks and appetizers. So you have a chance to get to know some of the speakers after we have this engagement, ask questions one-on-one if you want to do that as well. So that's the plan for this afternoon. We all survived the snow squall, so I think the rest of the weather and the drive home will be fine. All the wimpy people went straight home at noon, so we're in really good shape today. So first off, we're really excited that David Langdon came all the way from Washington, D.C. to start the conversation tonight and lay the groundwork from the federal perspective. So I'll introduce David first to give some short remarks, and then one at a time we'll have our speakers pop up at that point. David Langdon is a distinguished expert in economics and policy who has dedicated over 2 decades to public service. With an impressive background spanning the Department of Commerce and the Department of Labor, David's extensive experience and research in labor economics, macroeconomics, and policy analysis have made him a trusted advisor on issues ranging from intellectual property to economic development. So please give a warm Colorado welcome, David Langdon. He's the Department of Commerce Deputy Director, Office of Policy and Strategic Planning. And David, if you want to give your remarks from here, that might be easier, then we'll all jump on the stage. Okay.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So on behalf of Secretary of Commerce, U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, just wanted to thank Debbie for the invitation to come here and speak to all of you about an issue that matters to all of us and it matters to American workers, which is job quality. I love the framing of the panel discussion, what makes a good job and who decides. I particularly love the who decides question. And the quick answer is that we all do, along with the workforce here in Colorado, the workforce in the United States. It's around dialogues, around job quality. I wanted to set the table a little bit for that conversation, though, and talk a second more specifically about American workers and work in the administration and to invest in both the United States and in Colorado and in the workers across the country. So put simply, American workers, as we see it, are the source of our country's innovation and competitiveness. And it's no surprise that they're at the center of the administration's investments to revitalize manufacturing, including here in Colorado, and build innovation economies across the country. And it's really an imperative driven by decades of really poor public and private policies. On the public side, there's been too many federal training programs that really just have failed to prepare workers for jobs that are needed, or for jobs that basically fail to materialize. On the private side, I think there's too many companies that are focused on short-term returns instead of the long-term benefits from training and cultivating workers in quality jobs. So it's sort of on all of our sides here, really. It hasn't paid off for workers, companies, or really our country. And the administration's what they've talked about the Invest in America agenda, which includes the CHIPS and Science Act, the American Rescue Plan, and other programs, marks an opportunity to reset some of these decades of failed policies, both on the public and private side. And at the same time, invest in Americans and treat that as an imperative. We literally need hundreds of thousands of Americans for the new quality jobs that are being resulting from investments. On the manufacturing side, which is congratulations to Microchip here in Colorado, that is slated hopefully to receive $90 million to modernize and expand a fabrication facility in Colorado Springs, as I'm sure you know well. It was one of our second awards, or technically it's a preliminary memorandum of terms with the CHIPS program with NIST. This is part of a major effort to revitalize this entire critical sector for the United States, and it's exciting that Colorado here is really the second place where this investment was announced. We need quality American jobs to support our Tech Hubs program. 31 regions across the country have been designated as Tech Hubs, including in Colorado through the Elevate Quantum Colorado program, which is solidifying your leadership here on quantum information technology, working with NIST, part of the Department of Commerce, and again, resulting in hopefully in many jobs, thousands of jobs here we hope in the state. We know the second round of the program, the applications are closing, I believe, on the 29th, on Leap Day, which I'm sure you all know very well. So best of luck to you all on that. We need quality workers to extend affordable and high-speed internet to every community. Colorado is a beneficiary of $1.3 billion in federal funding, almost $1 billion of that directly from the Department of Commerce and then from other ones as well, to bring affordable high-speed internet, which is critical to all homes and all businesses. And these investments and others are really core to our nation's economic and our national security. And this connection between economic security and national security is truly an imperative. It's something that's distinctive about the Biden administration and their view towards how we need to advance as a nation. Likewise is their clear-eyed view around investing in workers. We really have to grapple with two apparently contradictory realities when we think about the labor market. One is that we're in the middle of a tremendous labor shortage, and skilled workers have never been in higher demand. We know this well here. Our unemployment rate is about similar to the national average of 3.5%. The highest rate nationally right now is in Nevada. It's only 5.4%. That's just incredible. I mean, so there's just a really, really tight labor market. We need to bring more people in to succeed. We need to increase labor force participation. On that note, that's sort of the contradictory reality. We have a tremendous labor shortage. At the same time, we have a lot of talented people who are on the sidelines. They lack access to training, they lack access to support services, and our approach is to do investments that actually provide that kind of structure. Our approach here at the Department of Commerce is actually, well, first of all, we're sort of new in this space, to be quite honest. We've been a major voice in the federal government on policymaking around workforce for a while, meaning we represent the business community in federal workforce policymaking. We promote registered partnerships, which I was just talking about, in the electrical trades, and in many other areas. We provide a lot of data through our Census Bureau, which is a major part of the Commerce Department. It lets us know the state of play of the economy. What we hadn't done traditionally is actually do worker training programs. That's changed. We're doing literally millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of workforce training, including through CHIPS, Tech Hubs, and other programs. And we have a really clear approach rooted in our boss, who was a former governor, Secretary Raimondo, former governor of Rhode Island, who have done the kind of work that has also been taking place here in Colorado, which is training programs that are built through a sectoral partnership model with clear employer commitments and employer-led partnerships that ensure that jobs are actually that training begins and ends with a job. We funded these kinds of efforts through the Good Jobs Challenge, including a program here through Unidos US, right here in Denver, which is preparing workers for jobs that truly exist in healthcare administration, human resources, and other professional services. Let's bring it back to job quality, though. So our approach is employer-led, but it's also worker-centered, because we know that we have to tap into the talents, skills, and drives of people who are actually on the sidelines. We have to be very clear-eyed about who we want to bring in to diversify and strengthen our workforce. We have to be very intentional about ensuring that the programs that we're doing lead to quality jobs in real companies. Because of that, early in, and we'll talk about this during the panel discussion, we developed a set of good jobs principles that outline sort of 8 characteristics, factors of what we consider to be a quality job. The principles were developed with our friends at the Department of Labor and the Commerce, so we bring a business and a labor perspective, and are meant to be a framework for workers, business, unions, government, others, for a shared vision of job quality. And so I'm looking forward to the panel discussion, sort of dig into the tangible aspects of that and what it means, and how we're deploying both the good jobs principles and a separate job quality toolkit that we've created. So thank you for inviting me. I got to see that.
All right, more to come on that. I think you all had the link too when you were invited to the presentation on the Good Jobs Principles. That was in that original link, and we'll talk more about getting into that framework as well. Next, I want to invite, we're going to welcome Lee Willer-Berliner to give some remarks on what's happening at the state level on the same framework. Lee Willer-Berliner is the Managing Director of the Colorado Workforce Development Council. Since 2014, Lee has been at the forefront of executing strategies to build and sustain an industry-led talent development system in Colorado. They are also a partner of Cobert, which we're excited about. Leveraging extensive project management and leadership experience, Lee collaborates with industry and public partners to ensure a statewide alignment of talent development efforts. With a background in mission-driven organizations and an MBA in social entrepreneurship from Duke University, Lee brings a wealth of experience to the table. So welcome, Lee. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you all today. For the initial framing and grounding, the Colorado Workforce Development Council is a governor-appointed, business-led, public-private partnership that is tasked with overseeing the strategy and integration of our talent development efforts throughout the state of Colorado. We have oversight of our public workforce system and also serve as the connector and convener across the domains of economic development, workforce development, K-12 education, and post-secondary education as well. And so we come into this conversation for a few specific reasons. Why do we think about good jobs? Ultimately, we know that a good job is paramount to an equitable labor market and helps lead to community prosperity. Our vision is that every Colorado employer has access to qualified talent, and every Coloradan has the opportunity for meaningful employment, which results in individual and statewide economic prosperity. We start with the demand side of the talent equation. We need to understand what the directionality is of our economy, what the needs are of the employers in our state, and then backwards map our education, training, and development programs to ensure that we're creating the workforce that we need today and the workforce that we need of the future. As we think about the power that employers have, as a business, you all are the ones who are creating a job, determining the quality of job and the relative quality, good or bad, of that, ultimately seeking to hire and retain qualified employees that can drive your mission and advance your work as an organization. And ultimately, when we think about that macro view, good jobs are at the foundation of an equitable economy overall. And we think about how we enhance the competitiveness of our business environment. This is work that we started engaging here in Colorado back in 2021, with a recognition that as a lot of jobs were lost at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the jobs that were lost were low-wage jobs. People exited the labor force who had often lacked opportunity for high-paying work. Many people who are coming from marginalized backgrounds were suddenly on the sidelines. And what we started to see as our economy came back online is that a lot of people were staying on the sidelines. A number of employers were employees were a little pickier about what jobs they wanted to pursue, and were really assessing what they valued and what they needed to look for in a role as they moved forward. And that was one of the things that led us to build out Colorado's job quality framework. And so you see the basic definition there on the slide. Definition of a good job: when the features of a job meet the needs of workers and allow the business to thrive. So when we think about job quality, it's not an either-or question. It's also not a black and white, yes and no, you have a good job or you have a bad job. Jobs exist on a continuum. We established this framework that you see on the right, the triangle visual, to recognize that this is also a community endeavor. That at the bottom rung, we have communities who have a role in attracting and growing businesses who are committed to job quality. When you think about the aspect of your economic development communities, your chambers of commerce, your employers, your education environments, everyone can work together to determine what type of community you want to have, the type of business you want to attract. In that middle level, that is where our companies create the good jobs that meet basic needs for individuals. And at the top of this framework is leadership. This can be individual leaders, it can be community leaders, but ultimately we know that when people choose to leave a job, more often than not, they're leaving a person rather than leaving a company. And so that interaction relationship with their direct supervisor has a huge impact on the overall quality of a job that they experience. And so leaders can elevate that opportunity for growth, for connection, and for meaning in a job. When we think about how we frame this in Colorado, David introduced briefly the 8 pillars or components of the Good Jobs Principles, which are fantastic. If you look at that middle column, and we'll make this available to you all in a more readable format than what this slide is, there are 6 ideas that we came up with for Colorado that in terms are the features of a good job. And what those are in entirety, I'll go back one, is that we look at wages, we think about benefits, we look at scheduling, safety and wellness, growth opportunities, and a sense of belonging. And those are the basic features that we identified through a process that was driven with our business partners, with employers throughout the state of Colorado, members of the Colorado Workforce Development Council, who came together to identify what we felt was the right framework for Colorado. One of the reasons why we engaged in this is that we saw that businesses could not often compete solely on wages to attract talent. And as we know, we've experienced a labor shortage environment over the last couple of years. We wanted to provide opportunities for businesses to sell themselves, to promote themselves, and create a distinction in the marketplace that could help with that attraction of talent as well as that retention of talent. The other reason we think about why this makes sense for us, one of the roles that we play as a state workforce board is to provide governance and oversight of our public workforce system, which is driven by WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And this is the guiding prevailing legislation nationally that sets up the structures that provide federal support to businesses and to individuals across a wide array of domains. One of the statements I love is in the overall legislative purpose in this federal act. And if you read federal legislation, I'm not sure who sits around reading federal legislation in this crowd, and that's totally okay. David, yes, you're right here with me. One of the purposes of this piece of legislation is to enhance the productivity and the competitiveness of the nation. So when we think about what we're trying to do with workforce development, as David referenced, our economic security, our national security, those things go hand in hand. We want to make America as great as it can possibly be in this day and age, and have the right constructs and makeups. We want tools that make sense for businesses so our economy can continue to expand. Ultimately, we want to help to close equity gaps as well. I'm going to take a little bit of time to highlight, again, what the principles are for the Colorado's framework and do a little comparison to the federal principles just to ground us in what we're talking about here. So 8 principles from the U.S. Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce that came out in the Good Jobs Principles, 6 that we developed or identified rather here in the state of Colorado. And while the titles are different, I think there's a lot of consistency in what we're talking about here and what they mean. And as I was reflecting on these slides, part of my realization was here in Colorado, we like to minimize the role of government, so our version just has less words than the federal version. That's one way you can think about it. Ultimately, we're both looking at pay and wages, and one of the pieces that comes out with wages is a predictable income and an income that can cover basic expenses. We also highlight allowing for wealth building in Colorado's framework. The definition of benefits, what we focus in on is really benefits that facilitate a healthy and stable life. So what does that mean for an individual? We don't have a prescriptive guide for Colorado of what benefits we think employers should offer, but what makes sense, what promotes a healthy life. Working conditions is something that we highlight, ultimately offering an environment that promotes physical, emotional, and psychological safety and wellness for every person who walks through those doors. This is in parallel to the job security and working conditions that are identified in that federal principle. As you can see, one of the federal principles is empowerment and representation, references to workers being able to form and join unions, and that's not something that shows up in our Colorado framework. We'll talk a little bit about that in the panel in a few minutes. The federal principles talk about recruitment and hiring. Obviously, we know that qualified applicants need to be actively recruited, and that if you as a business continue to rely on a word-of-mouth approach, to use a network solely to attract new talent, then your lens is relatively narrow on who you're going to be able to attract and bring into your company. There have to be proactive steps taken to get connected to those untapped pools of talent to ensure that we're bringing as many people in off the sidelines as possible. Again, David mentioned labor force participation as one of those factors we need to think about in this day and age. Colorado has ranked in the top 5 nationally over the past 4 years. And that's a focus for Governor Polis to maintain that status for labor force participation, because that means we have people who are showing up to work, who want to be engaged, who are looking for work, and are ultimately getting connected to our economy. And so it's great that we have the levels as high as we do have here in the state of Colorado, and yet we know that's still not enough. We still need to figure out how we bring people in, how we're tapping into those untapped pools, and these components are a part of that. We highlight a predictable schedule. A lot of jobs that cannot provide a predictable schedule then make it difficult for individuals to connect with their families, to engage in a lot of different ways in civic life. Last couple of principles that are distinct for Colorado. Transparent growth opportunities is our statement that is parallel to the skills and career advancement. Ultimately, if someone's going to be able to grow and develop within a company to build a career, they should know what that looks like. And you should be able to communicate that as an employer in a way that people understand and can connect to, and ultimately can see themselves with your company for the long haul. And the last piece here, organizational culture, is the language described in the federal good jobs principles. For our state version, we simply boil this down to a sense of belonging and knowing that inclusiveness and connection is what people are looking for in a high quality job. In terms of inclusion, accessibility, availability, diversity, and equity, these are things that both of our constructs highly emphasize. And for Colorado's version, it's implied throughout in each of these different components. It's more explicitly stated in the federal version. And ultimately, for us, we want to ensure that Colorado's economy works for every single person throughout the state, regardless of the zip code you were born in, you grew up in, regardless of your demographic background, your wealth, your educational status, your capabilities. Ultimately, we know that for Colorado to succeed, we need to create the opportunity for every single individual to succeed in this state. So thank you for having us here today. I'm excited for the rest of our conversation.
Thank you, Lee. That helps set the stage for what's happening at the state level. You've heard a little bit about the federal level, and in response to after the event, we'll make sure we get slides. We have permission to send out those slides, so you have some additional information. So 2 other people that are going to give remarks tonight are kind of from the employer lens. What does the business community think about how this is being implemented? How are they going to implement it in their own businesses? What advice they might have? And first up, we have Binh, Diep, who's going to join us with some opening remarks. Binh is the general manager and market leader for Slalom in Colorado and Wyoming. With over 8 years of creative and results-oriented leadership at Slalom, Binh has played a pivotal role in driving strategic growth and transformational change for over 150 organizations in the region. His extensive background, including a 17-year career at Accenture, showcases his commitment to community and workforce development, as demonstrated by his leadership in a governor-sponsored delegation to Switzerland just this past year, and his current role as commissioner for the Business Experiential Learning Commission. So please welcome Binh to the stage.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you to the Business Roundtable for having me here. Really excited today for us to share a little bit around how we applied these principles, as well as to learn and hear from you all as well. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Slalom is a global modern business technology consulting company. We have about 13,000 folks globally, but what makes us unique is that we have 700 people that live here in Colorado, most of them working here in Colorado. And most of these 700 folks work across the 150 organizations that Debbie just mentioned as well. What we've done with these good principles is applied that to Slalom. And what I'd like to share with you is how we've applied it and some of the benefits that you actually get from it, not just from an employee perspective, but also from a customer and business standpoint as well. So what I'd like to start is just, overall from these principles, kind of where do we start from here? But where I want to start first is just talking to you a little bit around the vision and the purpose of Slalom, because I think it really ties into the good job principles as well. And I'm going to tell you the vision and the purpose, and you're going to be like, wow, that's pretty bold, and I admit, and I like it a lot, but it is bold. So our vision is to create a place where every person has an opportunity to love their work and life. It's exactly what we're talking about today. Our purpose is to help people and organizations dream bigger, move faster, and build a better tomorrow for all. Again, very aligned with what we're saying. The reason why I share that is because there's a lot of alignment around that. And it ties back to what is good for business, what's good for our people, what's good for the community and your customers as well. So 3 principles that I want to call out, right, and how we've applied it. The first is around skills and career advancement. It's something that we take, it's very important to us from a skills and career advancement. Our goal from a Slalom perspective is that for our folks to be able to have the opportunity to grow the most in their career at Slalom, whether that you're there for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever that looks like, but that's our goal. And we build a structure to support that. Everything from learning and development, career coaching, mentorship. But what is key to this, as you think about these principles for your business as well, is how do you set those goals, and then how do you measure that? So that is something that we do for each one of these things, and I'll share, kind of the next thing. But around career development, we measure and we ask our folks, how are you growing as an expert and as a leader? And we take that really seriously in regards to how we're doing around that. And so that's something that we measure within our organization. The second aspect of this is around organization culture. Culture is a really important piece of our business. We think it's very unique to us, but every business here has a unique culture that's unique to you all as well. But our culture, things around values that we talk about, being humble, being curious, being a learner, a feedback organization, an organization that's fun and celebratory. What does that look like? How does that come to life? And so what we do is we look across and we keep those top of mind in everything that we do, whether that's in an employee opportunity and employee engagement, whether that's a customer type of opportunity that we're working on, or whether it's a community activity that we're working on. So how do we do that? That's another thing that we measure. So we ask our folks, as well as our clients, how are we doing around our values? How are we doing around creating meaningful work? Right, so think about what that looks for you in regards to what kind of goals and how do you measure that. The last thing that I want to share, and I can go through all the other ones, but we'll do that, save that for the panel, but the last thing I want to share is around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. It's near and dear to me, but it is something that we are making some really great progress on as well. Our goal is to mirror the community that we serve, both observable and non-observable traits. So that is what we're working towards, and I've taken a personal initiative in regards to how do we accelerate towards that goal within our organization of 700 people. And so, again, something that we measure and something that we continue to follow up on. The one thing that I would say in regards to this is work with your community partners and figure out what organizations are doing that really well, and how do you learn from that? So organizations that we partner up with, organizations like the Latino Leadership Institute, right? A terrific organization, right, that has really great programming, great ability to help us as Slalom. How do we continue to kind of figure that out as an example? So that's another kind of opportunity there, is how do you partner with those that are doing it really well, and so that you don't have to do this alone. Last thing I'll close is, what does it mean from an employee experience standpoint? Again, we measure our employee experience on a very regular basis. We're a very data-driven organization. But if you look across some of the things that I'm really proud of that we've won Fortune 100 Best Place to Work 8 years in a row, the Denver Post Best Place to Work the last 12 years. And just last year, we won for giant companies, both the Denver Post as well as the Denver Business Journal, Best Place to Work. The reason why I share that is not to brag, but to say that if you do this right, I think you get some of the best talent within the industry, and I feel like we have some of the best talent in the industry. Last but not least, to close on the customer side, I think for us to be able to deliver towards that vision of purpose that I shared, you have to have really good and engaged folks. And if we look at some of the customer scores that I'm really proud of, we have a Net Promoter Score of 61, which is really difficult in the industry. And so that's something that I think you can also achieve in being able to do this right and make sure that you have the best opportunities for your workforce. Thank you. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. It sounds like you've been doing this long before it was ever called something, the Good Jobs Principles. So that's been my experience in the business community, and you'll hear that from Karla as well, what they've implemented at their company. Next up, for some opening remarks, we have Karla Nugent before we start the panel. Karla is the Chief Revenue Officer and founding partner of Weifield Group. With an impressive track record of business development and pre-construction in multiple states, Karla has played a pivotal role in Weifield's growth to over 900 employees. She is recognized as a leader in the industry, advocating for a better construction workforce. Karla's commitment to innovation and workforce development and dedication in improving training for the next generation of construction workers has earned her prestigious accolades, including the AFP Large Business Philanthropic Award and the Colorado Chamber's Top 25 Most Powerful Women. And we're also proud that she sits on the board of Colorado Business Roundtable. And you'll hear from Karla's remarks, she's done some heavy lifting in things around job quality, the Job Academy in Washington, D.C., representing the business community and her industry as well. So welcome, Karla Nugent.
Thank you. Adjust this a little bit. Not the loudest voice in the room, so need a little help. All right, I'm going to come at this from a perspective of being an employer, from serving on the Colorado Workforce Development Council, and also serving on the Job Academy, Quality Academy, that was conducted last year, so kind of a lot of different angles. To dive in, and much like Ben had shared, we've been at this for quite some time. 23 years ago when we started Weifield Group here in Colorado, we are a commercial industrial electrical contractor in construction. We were looking at what differentiates us from competition. How can we add benefits and look at our offerings to our employees, what makes them stick and stay with us for a career. So our first thing we tackled was health insurance, right? How can we go beyond just part of health insurance? How can we provide 100% of health insurance? How can we start to pay for apprenticeship? How can we start to pay for books? How can we start to do fun stuff and have gifts and awards and da-da-da-da-da? It starts to become part of our culture. So over time, we've looked at these different categories for our benefits. It's how we connect with our employees. It's part of our culture. It's a big piece of Weifield Group community, how we celebrate. But I want to break this up more in the construct that Lee shared, tied to some of the Colorado language. So wages, I don't think we need to talk too much about wages. We all have different comparisons, different data. There's a ton of data out there, right, to know skill sets and how we're taking care of our employees. And if they have a thriving wage, they have wage progression. On the benefit side, we've seen a lot of change and movement in that. Employees are looking for benefits past or typical insurance. And so how do we meet those needs? When I have somebody say, my daughter's tried to commit suicide. My wife has left me. I don't know how to do my taxes. I have an immigrant family that has challenges coming in. I'm a single parent. I don't have transportation. I don't have childcare. We work with Minds and Associates, they're nonprofit. We pay them to connect with our employees for employee assistance programs. And it's awesome because they can be professional, have a confidential type of a setting to start to meet all of these real life things that are happening with our employees that are coming into the workspace. We also have a Helping Hands program. That's through our foundation. We can give non-tax money to individuals that are on hardship. Predictable schedule that's in this construct. Construction's very schedule-oriented, but there's a lot of things we can't control. When we run into changes in the building we didn't expect, a client adds more scope into our project, right? It starts to trickle into overtime. That's not sustainable, it's not great for our people. So back in 2015 and 16, we started doing studies around flexible work in construction. And everybody looked at me, been in construction, thought I had a third eye. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, if we're looking at recruiting and retaining the next generation, right? How do we look out of the box? People want different things, and how do we offer flexibility in construction where it's not all that flexible? So we have a white paper on that, and looking at how do we do a 4-day work week in construction. We have the data internationally, nationally, and locally. We have all of our data, and we can share with the client, if we can produce your project that's same quality, safe, on time, within budget, wouldn't you want to have an engaged employee workforce taking care of the craft worker where they can have a 3-day weekend? That was something our people are really excited about. So I have that online to share. We've moved to flexible time with some of our office staff where we can do that, flexible paid time off. Some of the language, working conditions, right? We'll look at different safety, gosh, especially in construction, spend a lot of time and training and money and investment on keeping our people safe and sending them home to their families. But now there's new language about psychological safety. What does that mean, right, to businesses? So different language coming at us, but how do we have an environment where employees can have a voice? They're safe to share ideas, innovation, criticism. How can they do that? A lot of our environment around that gets pulled into our sense of belonging. So that's been mentioned a few times here today. How do you measure sense of belonging? We are finding people want to be part of something. I want to be valued. I want my voice to be heard. I want to do something that has purpose. And so that might be in my business activities. It might be something I do with the community, outside of work, with my team. So there's a lot there. For us, we created a company council. We did it about 5 years into our business, realizing we as owners can't touch all of our employees. We want to hear all these ideas of what's working, what's not, how can we make it better. So the council asks those questions. They go work with all of our different job sites and our different departments. All of that comes up to our leadership team, and we're making decisions on benefits, on how we do training, fun things. Council has fingerprints all over our company. We have Women of Weifield. As a group, we are a minority group within construction. Less than 10% of the workers are female, so we're working to recruit more women into our industry, also working on to support women that are in our industry. We have connection events where we go out and listen as ownership and leadership of what's working, what's not, what's confusing, what can we make better, what's fun, how do we get together. We work hard, we play hard. Employee engagement surveys, stay interviews, a lot of these things I think you've probably heard before. Along with the sense of belonging, we've created a community team. It's about 20 different members that connect with our 100 charities. 40 of them we're involved with on a board capacity, committees, fundraising, advocacy, training, working with their different candidates. And so that's been fun because they set up how our employees can engage with our nonprofits. It's part of our culture. It's quarterly. We have quarterly goals around that. And they also set it up in how we engage with our customers. So all the fun stuff that we do with our customers, we're doing it around a lot of charity concepts, and we're doing it in multiple states and nationally. My favorite thing is celebrating our employees. We do so much of it. We've created a process around it, and that might sound really geeky, but we want to make sure we're consistent, that when you have a child, you get married, you run a marathon and win a race, you get your journeyman's license, you graduate, all of these things that are going on, we want to be consistent in the treats that we give people and the trips and the fun stuff. My favorite out of our anniversaries, they're different gifts. At 10 years, you get $10,000, 15 years, you have a 2-year sabbatical, so just really cool stuff. I could go on and on and on, but Debbie only gave me so much time. Our business roundtable members across the country, oops, missing this one, sorry, transparent growth. That's also another thing that is a little bit different, right? Business is now expected to be able to plot out the steps in career progression. So I'm not just coming in for a job. What are the skills that I'm gaining? How can I stack those? And where are the different places that I can career path? So having those conversations, sometimes that's new for business, like we're just working and just put the time in and it'll come. We really had to spell that out and create different pathways. We're launching a mentoring program, connecting employees past their team, past their boss for more connection, and also talking about succession planning. We just finished a future org chart so we can identify new positions that will be coming up. How do we mentor protege, plan for folks that are retiring? It's healthy to talk about these things. So other business roundtable members do so many cool things. I could have slides and slides and slides, but we see a lot of businesses moving into on-site daycare, also providing for daycare. We see a lot of different members that are supporting different outreach and different communities for promotion of Latino, Black, those of color. We have is IBM here tonight? I know they're one of our local partners. They've done a lot of progress in the PTAC community, where high school students can graduate with their high school diploma and an associate's degree, which we're talking a lot about that now, and stackable credentials, but it wasn't so when they started it. So neat things that we're seeing about some affinity groups, flexibility, our hospitality partners, Sage Hospitality, Hilton Hyatt, all those, they were looking at that before COVID happened. Chick-fil-A is beta testing a 3-day work week. You can list and lists of different flexibility options. We find a lot of fun. Some companies are giving you incentives to go off the grid, and will give you money and all this paid time off, which is pretty interesting. But we see a lot of paid education, not just stackable credentials or specific to that business, but credentials that turn into associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and more. So a lot of cool stuff that's been happening. So business talking to business, we innovate, we learn from each other. So back to coming to the Job Quality Academy. This was, again, with U.S. Department of Commerce and Labor. They partnered with Jobs for the Future, and they conducted 2 different sessions last year that were in DC. And 2 of the sessions comprised these 16 different teams representing 14 different states. Colorado had a team there. Each team had 5 individuals. 3 were from the state, 1 was a business seat, and 1 was union representation. So for Colorado, we had Department of Labor, Colorado Workforce Council, Office of Future of Work. Weifield sat in the business seat, and IBW 111 line workers sat in the union seat. A lot of different work. The states are at different stages. As you can see, Lee has some construct for the state. How does that work with the federal language? This is a slide that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Job Quality Academy had an update on different states are doing different things, getting ready to release job quality kits, different trainings. They're looking at maybe what the next steps, if there'll be other sessions around job quality. These are some of the levers that they're talking about pulling. Immediately as a business, I look at that and say there's some levers I don't have control of, or as a business, so I want to know more. So threw a lot of information at you, and this is why we're here talking today, right? It's a lot of new information that's going on, I think, at the federal level for those national employers talking, right? What does that look like? Do you need to know all the different state constructs? What is that going to look like as funding comes in? So looking forward to our conversation.
We'll have the panel go ahead, and those are tall chairs, but we'll do fine jumping up, and I'll take the one closest. Sorry about that. We'll kick it off first. I want to do a follow-up with David, especially as we've heard some of the private sector folks have a chance to speak as well. Kind of to the heart of it, what problem are we trying to solve with the Good Jobs principles?
So our work in this space dates from like the very start of actually from the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. And we had done work with the Trump administration promoting, not surprisingly from a real perspective, promoting employer training investments, right? The Republican administration is not as much into the public workforce system, but was very much interested in the importance of employer-provided training. And with the transition and looking at who was coming in and the new priorities, we recognized pretty quickly that good jobs were being heavily promoted as foundational to an equitable economic recovery. And we wondered if there was a place for the federal government to actually have a voice on what job quality was. We didn't want to presume there was a need because of so much great work that's going on in states and in businesses. Does the federal government actually add any value here? And we convened a bunch of stakeholders, actually probably about 6 people, from think tanks, business, unions, and others, to basically say, okay, what is your understanding around job quality? Is there a role of the federal government in providing like a definition, a framework, tools in this space? And the answer actually, I was surprised. I thought they would tell us, no, we've got it covered. And actually the response was the opposite, that actually there is a lot of value in the federal government making a clear statement about what we consider quality jobs to be. From the commerce perspective, we wanted something that was rooted in the business community. And actually the framework document we used was from the Baldrige framework, so which is basically a systems approach to building quality into all sorts of organizations. And the product of all this work and the stakeholder convenes was actually a toolkit. It predates the principles. It was actually I've got it here in my hands. But our job quality toolkit was basically a set of strategies designed for a small and medium-sized business audience. People who don't have an HR department or don't have maybe the time to think through exactly what it means to develop and implement the kinds of policies that are being outlined here, but would at least like to have a place to start. Something that organizations like Manufacturing Edge here in Colorado, as a Colorado MEP, could use in working with its clients. That's our first sort of foray into job quality. From that, ultimately, we worked with the Labor Department to develop a set of principles that both reflect worker needs and sort of aspirations around really the value of labor, and also from a sort of a rooted employer perspective. And the many words, I liked how you phrased that the government does put a lot of words on the page. It's sort of a result of negotiations, almost really labor business negotiations around really what we mean by job quality. What needs to be there, where government's falling short, our focus on organized labor and unions being a really important member in many cases, depending on the local circumstances and actors. The principles we developed are really the closest thing to a federal definition around job quality, and it's something we're deploying through a lot of our grant programs that we've outlined right now.
If I could interrupt, just to take a pulse from the crowd, how many of you have heard about this before our session, before we invited you? How many are very familiar with the Good Jobs principles? Okay, three or four. So I think that's interesting. When this was on my radar a year or so ago, I would talk to business leaders from a lot of the companies we represent, and nobody knew what we were talking about, even the Business Roundtable nationally. So it's interesting that I think it's just now getting out there. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's great. There's a lot of different, I think I really liked all the different talks we've had today, because there's so many different ways to go about this. I mean, I think ultimately what we're all saying is that it's about a dialogue that sort of speaks to the workers' needs, and that those needs vary quite a bit. Vary from location, vary from over time, and that in our case, the principles and the toolkit outline sort of the breadth of things that we need to take into account from before the job even starts. And it's also about the employee experience. That's sort of the core thing we're talking about. And the result would be becoming an employer of choice, so one that you would recommend to your friends. And I think we're all talking about the same thing there.
And just a follow-up for you, David, and I think what was interesting when I first heard about this, it felt like it was the aspirational part, showcasing best practices, and then the concern for some of the Colorado Business Roundtable partners was really more about the potential sort of carrots and sticks that might come along with it. And perhaps you can speak to that. I think how I was reading it is if there's an opportunity where employers don't meet now this sort of federalized guideline, they could potentially be ineligible for some of the federal money coming down through the investment. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
So there's sort of two big areas to think about. One is like procurements, and the other one is sort of federal grant investments, like the CHIPS investments here. On the procurement side, we really haven't, and I will say in both cases, really the idea is that, which I really wholeheartedly agree with, is that the federal government's putting money out there that are just creating jobs. We really, I think, owe it to taxpayers and owe it to everybody, even just because of basic decency and economic efficiency, to ensure that those are good jobs. So I think that's sort of the underlying intention. The principles haven't been outlined and used in procurement cases, but they have in grants. So for example, the tech hubs. So we are investing in quite a few communities, regions in the nation that we feel have the potential to be competitive leaders really globally in certain technology areas over a decade. So in the case of Colorado's in quantum and information technology. And those investments will result in job creation, there'll be worker training, there'll be a lot of companies that are required to be at the table. And we use the Good Jobs principles in this program as a requirement, in that the companies that are participating must speak to how they will work towards meeting the Good Jobs principles. That's not a checklist. We're not going through and saying, okay, what are you doing about employer empowerment? What are you doing about job security? But it is sort of our understanding from the federal perspective what it means to have a good job. And so each company may talk about it differently. We've all seen that already. And I'm sure you all have outstanding jobs, but do we check all the boxes? No. It's all about continuing improvement. And we're just giving a framework for having those kinds of conversations through our programs and trying to ensure that there'll be good jobs resulting from them.
Okay. Lee, for you, tell us a little bit more about the Colorado language, and you helped remind me that Colorado was really at the forefront of developing this even before it was developed federally. What stakeholders were involved? How was the Colorado framework put together?
So several years ago, Colorado got connected with Results for America, which is an organization really looking at how do we ensure that government decision-making is grounded in the use of evidence and data. And so there's a number of domains. They've worked with education partners, with local cities, and they launched the first workforce fellowship in 2019. And then this was kind of an offshoot of our engagement with Results for America, and that they were starting to say, how do we think about the relative quality of a job that the workforce development system is helping to promote and helping to connect people with? Sometimes there's criticisms of the public workforce system that it's not getting people into high-quality, high-wage occupations. And there's a lot of dynamics that play into that when you look at the data, but ultimately we wanted to have a framework that could help people understand all the various factors that lead to a quality job experience, something that an employee is excited about and attracted to, and ultimately can help fuel that retention. And so the dynamic that we were in 2020 and 2021 was one of how do we build back our economy? How do we ensure that as we're getting people reconnected to employment, that it is a better job than they may have experienced in the past? And so that was one of those motivating factors, and also to ensure that employers had a mechanism to sell themselves. We looked at research that the Aspen Institute had done. We were connected with a national group which was really trying to figure out how do you provide some metrics around this. And the Greater Cincinnati Chamber of Commerce led an effort with a huge number of companies in that area to take these concepts and look at the data they had on hand and actually come up with relative scores. And then they could benchmark where any one individual company ranked across some of these domains and factors, both across the community overall and then also for their specific industry. And that was the direction we were headed, thinking that having the ability to benchmark could really provide with employers a powerful tool to set themselves apart in the marketplace right now. We didn't quite get there for a few different reasons. Ultimately, the language in these principles, we connected with our partners here at the Colorado Business Roundtable. The Workforce Development Council itself is a business majority council, and so we have business members from that group, and then labor partners and community-based organizations as well. So a lot of different insight that came up with these different factors.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we had a meeting with some of our business leaders, and I kind of laugh about how you said Colorado's a little different. We don't use as many words. We sort of we have less principles. I always laugh, and I come from a political background. I say Colorado's a freedom state. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell my business what to do. Right? I mean, it's sort of how we vote. We vote down tax increases. We're very freedom-oriented, which I think you mentioned. So one of the factors that wasn't on there in the Colorado piece was about union representation. And I'd love for you to give more input on that. It probably, one reason I would suspect is it just doesn't fit our labor market. It might fit Pennsylvania, it doesn't fit Colorado. Was that one of the reasons why you had shifted one of those principles?
Yeah, I think ultimately that did not rise to the top of the list as something that we heard people saying they wanted to be thinking about and talking about at the time when we were developing this framework. We know roughly Colorado's labor force, less than 10% part of an organized union at this point in time, and so it is less of a factor here than in many other states. Ultimately, I think what we tried to highlight was the transparency around growth opportunities. And when you think about apprenticeship models and you think about some of the benefits that often come with participation in a labor union, it's knowing where you can aspire to. And so we wanted to highlight kind of what the spirit was. Growth opportunities, the safety and wellness protection, that sense of belonging from a cultural standpoint as well. Those are the things that came out more in the research we were doing for what was going to fit for Colorado.
And then last for you, Lee, and then we'll kind of keep running, but how will you monitor or track employers related to the principles? How does it apply? Again, when you think about carrots and sticks, what do employers need to know in terms of what this could provide a benefit for them in some regard? And to be frank, how could it potentially exclude them from opportunities in the future?
Sure. So one of the pieces of our work as we were developing and deploying this framework is that we became the stewards of $60 million of stimulus funding through the American Rescue Plan Act, which we were deploying through a variety of mechanisms to promote employee upskilling, reskilling, and next skilling, and enhance the capacity of our talent development system throughout the state to connect people to ultimately good jobs. We took a small portion of that to bring on board an employer coach on our staff. And so that individual, who is a business owner herself, very grounded in what it means to run a business, to be a part of a community, has been able to work with employers in a variety of settings to provide coaching on these concepts. And there is no stick that comes along with that. For a business, there's not an opportunity you're not going to get to be a part of if you ignore some of these principles and practices. It's very much that incentive to say, here's information on how you may be able to separate yourself within your community. Here's things for you to think about right now. And as inflation started to tick up over the last year, again, we know everyone can't compete on wages alone. And so how do we think about the other dynamics that an employer can offer to ensure they can attract and retain their workers? And so that individual, I think, in that role has helped to say, here's the model, we can coach you, we can help you think about it. We're also engaging in work with employees and job seekers. And so through the public workforce system, helping an individual to understand what these aspects of a quality job mean. And so we do want individuals to be informed about the choices they're making, to know what they should be asking an employer in a job interview to help set themselves up for success. Because ultimately, if you have an individual who walks into your company with a blindness to what the schedule is going to be and what that means for their personal life and the things they used to engage in before they signed on to a job that they didn't know what that schedule might be, that's not going to be a good match. You're going to have turnover, you're going to have to invest more dollars in recruiting and training somebody else. And so ultimately trying to create the environment where we can make those positive matches. There's a small part of our work that has been making grants to community-based organizations to promote training. We've been able to do some work with trade associations as well, and we advance the role of sector partnerships, which are employer-driven partnerships in a regional basis of the same industry coming together. And again, we talk about these concepts as tools and as options for them to pursue in terms of thinking about how they solve for their overall worker strategies. And ultimately, we're looking at that worker shortage issue, and that's what we're trying to impact.
Okay. Ben, let me bring you into the conversation. From your remarks, it sounds like, again, you've adopted this way before it was a thing, right? The private sector sort of has been moving. Tell us more, how are you going to adapt, if any, or do you feel like these are things you've already had in place for Slalom and already things that you're consulting on?
Yeah, so thanks for the question on that. I mean, I think I go back to the vision, the purpose, and the company that that we want to become, and I think we lead with that, and then we look at these principles and say, hey, are we meeting these principles as well? And I think that's where we continue to look for opportunities to make sure we're staying ahead of that. We do a lot of benchmarking as well, as we mentioned. We're very data-driven around this. And so the economics continue to change. I think the environment continues to change. And so I think for us, it's more around, I mean, it's a very competitive environment, as we all know. I think there's workforce shortages around the U.S. and especially in Colorado as well. So it's a very competitive environment. And so I think if we want to continue to retain and attract the best talent, we have to continue evolving, and we can't just stay stagnant with what we're doing and what we think is good enough. I think that's part of this evolution is, we're a continuous learning organization, and we'll look for ways to make sure that, we're looking at these principles as well to say, how are we staying on top of this and to be able to retain the best talent that's out there. So.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think when I became president of Covert two months before COVID hit, which was interesting timing. But workforce was always the number one issue for the priorities of our board members. When COVID hit, it became, gasoline was put on that. It was the number one issue by far. And so we see a lot of our employers, again, from academia, business, community, and government, sort of being creative all the time on how do we attract and retain talent. And it is something, we have a Future of Work event you're all invited to May 8th. It's something we delve into pretty heavily. So it's not, it's been part of our conversation. So these are interesting in terms of just the government approach to something that I think the private sector has been doing for quite some time. So this question, maybe for Karla, is a little kind of a little more spirited question, but what is a bad job? How would you define a bad job? I think about what you write, Steve, like who is the guy who does dirty jobs, where he highlights the jobs that nobody wants but have to be done. I think I see Rebecca in the audience. She runs a logistics company. People have to be on the road, and it's horrible. Sometimes there's just bad jobs, but what, I mean, how do you think about that as the private sector? They still have to be done, but how do we cure that? Maybe Karla, can you answer that?
Wow, well, I've had this conversation around this good jobs quality. Like, are we focusing on, is it a bad barrel of apples, or is it a bad apple in the barrel? Right? And of course, there's some companies that just
head down, I'm trying to grow this, I'm small, I can't offer all these things, I'm just trying to get things done, right? That's the reality, and that's out there, and there are some misses. But I think there's more awareness than ever of all the innovation that's happening, and businesses love to share information, like how you tried that, what did that look like, right? When you tried this daycare, when you did this special outreach program, when you reimbursed for tuition, right? We learn from each other, and so that gets me excited, and kind of high tides rise all boats. I think, fortunately, we're always going to have some folks that make bad decisions, but the more we elevate and have awareness, like of all these great things that have been done, are being implemented, and will continue to evolve, it's a neat place that we're at. So I'd rather celebrate it than, I don't want the stigma of business as being bad, because there's so much good that we do in our communities for our employees. There's stories and stories of all these businesses right here across the country. There's really, really cool stuff going on.
And that's even our mission, business is a force for good.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the Job Quality Academy that you went to in DC. We always think it's great. Karla is willing to take time out of her busy schedule running a business to go and represent business there. So I'd love to hear more about that. And then it might be a way for other employers to be involved, whether it's business employers or academia. How can they use their voice like you have?
I think that was a neat opportunity. I split some of that work with Kelly Bolin, that's in the back. He's our Chief People Officer, if you want to tackle him on some of the Job Quality Academy. It was a different mindset to be in these teams, right? Because each state had 5 people, and we're talking about job quality in business, and I'm used to doing it in a peer environment where you're with a bunch of different businesses and you're sharing all this best practice. And so now we have 25% of that convening, those 16 teams are business. We have 25% business, right? Heavy government. No offense, but it was a different environment to be in. So it was like, okay, listening, taking this in, representing the state, thinking of our, all of our different businesses, small, big, large. And then it was a different perspective because the acting secretary of Department of Labor kicked off the event by saying, good job is a union job, and we need to show preference to the union. So I'm like, okay, well, business model shouldn't matter, right? 90% of the jobs are merit. So how do we engage all these businesses? And there's different business models behind them, but ultimately we're focusing on the individual and the people and folks that thrive, because when our employees thrive, right, communities thrive, the state thrives, it's all good stuff. So serving is important for us to pay attention, right, and be available, because when we do have, our state moving, our government moving, there's all these different layers. How do we have these connections and these relationships that they can pull in what's going on in manufacturing, what's going on in IT, what's going on in aerospace. There's so many work sectors that make up our state, our country, and a lot of us are tied into national businesses. So.
And I'll follow up with David next on a question about predictability, but first you, Karla, how does this affect your planning for your company in terms of predictability? How do you manage this? Does this concern you in terms of potential business opportunities in the future? How are you looking at this strategically?
I think for us, we do so much government work, if it's at the state level, our aviation, our schools, our wastewater treatment plants, all this stuff, work that we do for the state. We pay attention to that. We do a lot of base work as well, federal work. So we're paying attention right now. We're working on the BABA Act and figuring out how that impacts some of our projects in Buy America. The new Securities Acts, we have to get certified. So all these changing things, we are looking at it. Will it change as far as a certification and something that we need to get ahead of and train our people? Part of our DNA, we're there. Like we do this. This is part of our people, hopefully, is apparent. But yeah, how does that maybe click into something that might be a checklist or regulatory for a project? That's, I think, what we're paying attention to.
And then David, I'll ask you to respond on that. And I was thinking about a recent meeting that some of our board members had with a state senator who was talking about some new tax ideas that he was going to run, some bills. And even if they were good ideas, I think our market presidents and C-level people were like, oh my gosh, any change takes time. It takes, folks internally to figure out, to adjust. Even something that eventually could be good, it's an unpredictability that changes folks who are trying to manage large organizations. So what would you say as far as, is this kind of set? How do you tell people, is this set for a while? How might this change over time? I mean, that's,
So it is 2024. And so it's an election year for an administration. So there's like huge things that are unpredictable. I just like that. I live this like intimately. I'm a career employee and surrounded by political appointees. And I've navigated a few different transitions, and it's both exciting and super challenging. All that said, so I mean, things can change, and policy priorities can change like in a breathtakingly fast manner. I'm sure at the state level as well. All that said, though, the issues we're talking about here aren't going away. A lot of the work we're doing on job quality actually had its roots in stuff I did with like the Lock and Jumps team in the last administration, which is kind of interesting. And I think a lot of the themes will go forward. Will there be nuances, and would a different administration have a slightly different definition of what job quality is? Potentially. Would the union piece maybe vary? Would a different labor secretary have different statements about unions? Maybe. But the core elements are all there, and the core approach toward just like dialogue with your employees about what you need to succeed. This isn't like a DC telling you what to do. It's more or less just reflecting back and providing information to the broader business community about what we're learning from you all. Really. And so that's not going away.
okay. And then for employers in the room to give feedback at the federal level, how would they be able to do that, to interact with your office?
Well, we're pretty
If you say it's employers telling, giving
I have business
feedback.
cards, but I know so the work we're doing on, there's multiple aspects of it really,
Yeah.
so it depends on what specifically we're talking about. On the job quality work, it's actually rooted in NIST and through the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program. So they're the keepers of our job quality toolkit and our work within the department. They're always open to talk to you about it, as well as talk to you about our new Baldrige the new national award for the Baldrige program. So if you have questions about that, I'd love to highlight it. Companies like yours might be interested in it as well. But I have business cards, and we're all regular people in DC, and it's a very, very small town. So, anyways.
Well, and it's fun to have you here in Colorado, because you might hear different points of view. Like we said, we're west of the Mississippi, kind of this Western, freedom-oriented people. So,
I'm enjoying that.
We'll buy you a drink after and keep chatting. Lee, same for you. What would you recommend for employers in the room who might want to get more involved or hear more information as well?
So I'll start with kind of a more global ask, if you will, which is that I start off by stating that we have a fundamental belief in Colorado that workforce development has to be demand-driven. We need to know the directionality of our economy. We need to understand the needs of employers and where businesses are headed. We also need business leadership in this space. And I was on a panel last week talking about, talent development. Why should someone engage in work-based learning? Why would an employer invest in that? And if you think about the construct of a supply chain versus the idea of a value chain, if you have a company that relies on a supply chain for talent, and the education system is that supply chain, and you can walk to the foot of your high school or community college or four-year institution every May and you get everybody right off that line and they're perfect for you, great, you may not have any issues. But if you would ever invest in one of your suppliers and enhance the value of that, working vertically or working downstream in a different direction, that's the same thing you should be doing with your talent, to think about how, as a co-producer of talent, we can ensure that we're creating the right opportunities and developing a Colorado workforce that is going to advance your company and help you move forward down the road. And so there's a lot of different ways in which employers can get involved and stay involved in the development of talent in our state, from serving on a governor-appointed board, as Karla does, as Binh does, which is a fantastic opportunity, and we need people to be in that role, but then also to open up your doors for training opportunities, to be partners with career and technical education, to be a valued voice and ongoing presence in the role of our educational systems. To that end, we have a focus on continuous improvement and continuous enhancement. We didn't launch this to say, this is our 4-year model for job quality, or here's the 2021 version, next year come back for the 2022 version. A lot of the work that we do from a state standpoint is developing frameworks, helping to ensure that the condition exists in which local work can thrive. And to that end, it's a more organic process. When we start to hear from folks that they're not paying attention to it, or no, this doesn't make sense anymore, or we see pivots in the overall economy, then we want to re-engage and we want to change and think differently about what that looks like. And so our doors are always open for communication. The full State Workforce Development Board gets together 3 times a year, and we talk about this topic. And we hear from those employers about whether or not we need to update this and refresh it and ensure that it's still relevant for the jobs of today and for the directions we're moving.
Great. And another question, I don't know if this is better for David and Lee. We have also partners within Colorado Business Roundtable that are the institutions of higher ed in Colorado. And one of the elements, and it might be more in the federal piece, because you had so many extra words to look at and wonder, a little about them, but one of the pieces was about unnecessary credentials, unnecessary education. Yep. And I had some feedback from that, from some of our institutions of higher ed, that was concerning, that there's...
Written a business model about it.
What's that? Yeah, I mean, is that the federal government sort of thinking about how they're going to think about unnecessary credentials, unnecessary education, and would they come between an employer and an employee on that issue?
I'm not sure the federal government would take but basically this is just other words for skills-based.
And is that a state thing as well, Lee?
And this is basically the idea is around skills-based hiring, right?
Oh, okay.
And that together with the idea of just that there's multiple pathways to like the middle-class jobs. And so, I think there's been a lot of research, although it's actually it's still a little bit controversial about the value of companies reassessing degree requirements for jobs and whether or not it's actually needed or not. And I say it's controversial because just today I read a piece around Burning Glass Institute just published a study showing that actually a lot of companies that had committed to removing degree requirements actually ended up still hiring basically people with college education, and there's legitimate reasons for this. Mm-hmm. And so, but I think but basically I think that piece is just a reflection of the idea that really companies do need to be really, I think, thoughtful around when they do job advertisements about what actually they're really looking for. I say this as an employer too. We have 49,000 employees in the U.S. Department of Commerce. I have a staff that we have our hands tied many ways relative to companies, and in terms of the types of HR practices we can deploy to try to make the jobs attractive, and being really, really precise in announcements about the type of work that we're actually trying to fill and the type of people the exact kind of skills we need is critical to us, and we think it's true in the business community as well.
Yeah.
So.
Lee, did you have something to add on that?
Yes, here in Colorado, we are promoting the construct of skills-based hiring, and that's something that Governor Polis has given an executive order about for the state as an employer to ensure that we're opening up jobs to people of all types of backgrounds and not relying on that degree as a proxy. And I think that's the important piece, is that in many fields, for various reasons, an employer started to use a bachelor's degree as a proxy and a screen. And I think you can look at the expansion of technology, of that rapid resume screening, which it made it easy to pull out that keyword and just narrow a pool very quickly. There's other reasons from an HR liability standpoint that, they see that as black and white objective, and so they're not going to get sued just because they eliminated somebody. But ultimately, part of the work that the Markle Foundation did, the research showed that they looked at the role of administrative assistant. And for job postings, 70 to 90% of the job postings required a bachelor's degree to be an administrative assistant. When you polled the group who already had that occupation, only 20% of those folks had that on their resume and in their background. And so really thinking through where is this absolutely critical to somebody coming in the door day one. And then also for our education partners, I think part of this is a call to say, how do we ensure that the models we have are still relevant and we're communicating that they're relevant? And part of what's happened is that over the last 30 years, the promotion of the college for all mindset didn't get into the idea of the distinctions between an engineering degree and a philosophy degree. And they both deliver great skills. But how do we articulate what skills are being developed and the experiences you're going to have in that setting and how that translates into the job market? And so we have younger folks disillusioned with the idea of a college education because of the rising costs, but then also this lack of connection to the jobs that are going to be there ready for someone. So how do we break through that? And it's something we need to do together. It's not something that a business can decide without an education partner in the room, because the other piece that I really value in the models of skills-based hiring is that when you do it with fidelity, you're also changing your onboarding plan and recognizing that your best candidate may only have 70% of the skills that you're really looking for, so you already then identify in the immediate process, what's that next 30% we're going to train them on? What's the day one training, what's the day 90 training, what's the day 365 training? So a lot of different components within that.
Yeah, and that'll be a good topic when we have our future work event in May as well. Really, it seems like from our partner perspective, it's an all of the above approach. There are certainly degrees where you better have an amazing traditional higher ed backbone here in Colorado to make sure students and learners can reach where they want to reach. but all of the above. The trades, as Karla would say, there's so many opportunities and pathways to explore all of them. So that's really interesting. Ben, final question for you. Tell us, how are you going to advise your clients on this? You represent a lot of different industries and I think employers. Where do you see opportunities for them? Where do you see challenges for your clients?
So, been in consulting for nearly 30 years, so I guess you can't go through a conversation without maybe sharing a framework. So there's a framework that we did a study in regards to over thousands of companies around like what are the attributes of a growth company. And as part of that, we came up with this thing called the growth formula. And within that growth formula, there's 5 components of it. One is, companies that are what we call customer obsessed. What your end customers look like is part of the ingredient. Customers that have really great teaming and teaming dynamics is another part of that. Customers that really embrace innovation is a third component. Customers that have a really strong operating foundation is the fourth component. But the fifth component, which is where I tie this into, is customers that have strong leadership alignment. And I think that's where I would start, from a consulting standpoint, is understanding we're all leaders within our organizations within this roundtable here, understanding where you all want to be in regards to these principles that have been laid out. And where do you want to lead in? Where do you want to make sure you just kind of meet some of those criteria? But like understanding that and getting alignment across the leadership team is really important, I think, and that's what's going to allow you to be able to make the most impact in regards to those 8 good job principles would be one thing. It's just really stressing that leadership alignment. What do you all want as leaders? And then leading by example around that. Michelle Carter sits over there. Maybe if you want to raise your hand, Michelle. But Michelle is our chief of staff. We work together very closely on a lot of these initiatives within our organization here. And so it is, it is something that my leadership team is top of mind on as well. And so again, what do you want to promote as leaders within your organization? How do you drive alignment around that? And then how do you want to lead with that? That would be my first thing. Second thing is in regards to taking a look at this and figuring out, again, kind of assessing where you want to be and where you are today. Third thing, as I mentioned, is around measuring it. Right? I think part of this is you can say it, but when you really measure it, and we measure a lot of these, all these criteria that we have in here, empowerment is something that we measure on, diversity and inclusion we measure on, wages obviously we measure on, but like, how do you want to measure this across your organization, and how do you see yourself making forward progress around that? And then the last piece that I would say, just kind of similar to what I kind of shared, is you don't have to do this alone. Right? It seems like an amazing community here. How do you lean on each other? How do you lean on folks that are outside of this community? I think Lee and CWDC does a fantastic job in regards to kind of laying out some of this framework as well. But how do you leverage each other? How do you leverage some of the best practices that you all come up with? Because I'm sure each organization here is probably leading across a number of different things. How do you share some of that to be able to weave that into the strategy that you want to be able to you kind of roll out for your own organizations?
Perfect, thanks. We've got just a couple minutes left. I want to give Lee about 30 seconds, everybody about 30 seconds to kind of close out. Lee, you want to go next?
I want to say, first off, I think Rebecca still feels called out that she has bad jobs, and that's not the case. We don't believe it by any stretch. Again, the idea of job quality, it does exist on a continuum. And ultimately, we want to present this here in Colorado to say, how can employers use this as an incentive? Think differently about how you drive your own growth strategy. And I'm reflecting on what Ben said. A lot of this purely aligns with what Gallup is going to tell you, with what the Covey Institute is going to tell you, and a lot of other mainstream business organizations say is good for business.
David?
So I will say job quality can be an intervention. I'm guessing that our work, especially with some of those smaller employers, is that if things aren't going well, turning things around requires a lot of work. It was pretty intense. I think operate what you've all set up in terms of building structures takes a lot of work. And so partnering up together is really important. In the manufacturing side, I would endorse working with our manufacturing edge here in Colorado. And but it's a journey.
And good luck in the fall 2024. Yeah.
I'm stable. I do okay.
Karla, like your last remarks for us?
Sure. I just look at business, what are we doing in this space and how are we talking about it more? I think sometimes we go and execute and we focus on this recruiting and retention piece, but we don't share, right? And so these team, right, at the federal level, they need to have more businesses that speak up and give best practices and, wow, you totally thought out of the box there, I need to try that, how did you do that? Because our whole goal is that engagement and taking care of the employee.
Perfect. And I thought the best line wasn't that Rebecca has good jobs, but David, we're here from DC. We don't want to tell you what to do. I think you said something along those lines. And that's a good chance for us to go have a drink together, to share your feedback with the panel that you just heard, and we'll be sure to send all of you some additional follow-up information. With the Colorado Business Roundtable, we've been involved in this issue this past year, and we were very frank with Lee and very frank with David that, we think that employers do have a lot of concerns that Karla expressed, whether they're employers at university systems or business. Really this, maybe that this is a solution looking for a problem, that the free market is already churning where business leaders are staying up late at night, George is nodding his head, trying to make sure they're attracting and retaining talent, thinking about it almost every day. And so we want to make sure that we bring convenings like this together to make sure employers have a seat at the table. And frankly, it's welcome at the table. Lee and his team want more feedback, they want partnership with the employer community, so does David. And I think this is part of, what makes us a unique organization. We want to convene on tough topics, where when we disagree on some of the details, we're going to do it respectfully, we're going to do it openly as an employer coalition. And when we agree and find areas of commonality, we're going to join forces enthusiastically. So we welcome the chance to bring this issue to all of you, because I think it is one of those things that business doesn't know about, but that's going to have a big impact on business potentially. And so we want to make sure that we use our voice on this issue going forward. So with that, I just want to thank the panel one more time. This is important. We appreciate David flew all the way in from DC. Thank you, guys. And now we're concluded. We welcome you to stick around for a drink and some wonderful appetizers and continue to engage with the speakers today. So thank you for attending.